we're in this specific place. As discussed in the previous thing, trying to resurrect the ladder that leads humans to the divine. Anyways, we're trying to study the 8 chapters, which are a weird book when you really know what he's talking about. Before you know what he's talking about, it's like giving you these great ideas. But after you do, you figure out that it's a little weird. Or at least that's my conclusion from reading it today with my friend in the morning. Because what is he doing, the Rabbi Maimonides? Well, he sort of tells us what he's doing, right? That's one good thing about him, that he likes to tell us what he's doing. And he told us in his preface to this little work, that what he's doing is trying to teach us how to achieve prophecy. I always like saying this because it doesn't make sense to anyone. Which is another word for achieving the human perfection. Assuming that prophecy is the highest human perfection. Right? Now, which is all of this is another word for a kind of ethics, right? Or really a kind of life, or a kind of way of conceptualizing what the good life is about, which bases everything on the person, really everything, but the good for anything would be like that, but the human being specifically, which is what we're talking about, being what we would say now was the best version of what he is, right? Or actualizing all his potential, or achieving the perfection or completion or actualization of what it is to be the thing that he is. Now, the important thing to notice is that specifically for the Rambam, there's coming from a whole tradition that thinks this is not the one that made it up. Even after, so we'll say something like this, even after, I'm just doing straight thought, even after we have this like discussion, like one way to start the discussion, which Rambam doesn't start with this at length, he doesn't do philosophy, but one way to start the discussion was to say that there's all these kinds of lives, all kinds of lives that people live, and we have to figure out what is the correct one, right? You could go out on the street and find people living a bunch of different kinds of lives, right? At each of them you could be successful or not successful, but first deciding what the criteria of success is, or what the aim of the good life, what kind of aims there are, is a very complicated thing, mostly because the one place where the Rambam discussed this was, we read this in Bagdama to Parsha Mishnah, because humans, unlike most other things, do many things, and therefore there are many different lives to live, right? Unlike trees, which only do 3 things, humans do all kind of things, and it's basically not clear which is the human thing, which is one way of asking the question. Or is there even one human thing? Maybe humans don't have a good, maybe unlike everything else, right? This is the nihilist theory. Maybe unlike everything else, humans don't have a defined good. Whatever you want, that's what you do. There's no other being in the universe that acts that way besides for humans. Well, then you could go on to claim that everything acts that way in some weird way. Okay?
And my dog is not going to do non-dog things. It's only going to do...
It seems weird for someone to say that a dog, I mean, you could train your dog to do various, very little changes, but...
They're all within the same...
Yeah, and a good dog everyone knows what that is. I mean, there's a good dog that's good for humans and a dog that's good for other things, but it's like he's healthy and he has whatever dog things that they do, exactly. No dogs have, as far as we know.
No dogs are taters.
No, also they never have midlife crises where they're like, what is my life even about, right? Well, my life is about being a dog, obviously. Right. I mean, the vet knows, your owner knows if a dog belongs to someone, okay, so you have like another role in some sense, but that's the human's problem, not really yours. And that's all, like there's nothing else going on. And humans have these crises, these moments of question, which makes this whole discussion start, right? Where we don't know what we are, don't know what we want to be, right? In other words, what kind of a thing is this human being, or what kind of things are good for a human being to do? Now, what I want to get at is, this is the question, it's not actually an answered question, right? It's hard to ask it, but it's not an answered question, really. And including within the tradition, what I mean to say is, that even after, now we come, the Rambam is coming from a whole tradition, as he says himself, which says that there's an answer to this question. And the answer to this question is derived somewhat analytically. In other words, since we realize that what we're looking for is the human good, or the best kind of human life, so it seems to be a very simple procedure for figuring out what the human life is. And the procedure is finding the things that
we uniquely do.
Exactly, that divide, how do I say that? I forgot the word. The things that separate humans from other animals. Differentiate, exactly. And those differences or those differentiations should lead us to the human good thing. Turns out that this is not actually as good of a procedure as he pretends it is, because humans do many things that most other animals don't do. And specifically, humans do this thing where they do a lot of things. So maybe there could be a bunch of arguments constructed on the basis
of this. Can we figure out what animals should be based on what they most uniquely do? Like animals as a...
In some sense we do, because when I'll explain you what this means. In some sense we do. Did we go through this argument once? In some sense we do, because when I ask you what a good dog is one that, well, I don't know, that barks good and does dog stuff good, or runs around and catches the things, and I don't know, things like that. Or if he's a working dog, then he does whichever work that dog is supposed to do. Now, of course, that's only one sense of the answer, right? Because a good dog is also a dog that obeys the laws of gravity, for example, right? And if he wouldn't, it would be a bad dog. In other words, he wouldn't be able to be a dog, because something would be in the air, and that would make things complicated somewhat for being a dog. And the same way, a good dog is also a good plant. In the sense that being a plant means something that takes a nourishment and grows and things like that. But when we talk about a good dog, we're not really talking about that. We're assuming all of that, obviously. Those things are needed, they're necessary for being a good dog. You need to have the physical plans, not what Aristotle would call nature. You need to have also vegetative soul, which is whatever it means to be a living animal, but mostly or uniquely, specifically. But I talked to you about the virtue of a dog, right? The excellence of a dog. What I'm talking about is what is specific to the dog. Because, in other words, a dog who's, I keep saying like this, a dog who's, well, I don't know, let's say...
I'm talking about on the soul level, meaning what added, level, not necessarily within a specific species, but a dog, meaning...
Whenever we talk about the good of something, what we mean, also semantically, but also what we really mean, is the specific good of that thing. Because, for example, right, like I say, in order to be, you can talk about a human being more easily if you speak about even a specific role of a human being, right? So, for example, if I'm a teacher, okay, I'm the kind of human that's a teacher, let's assume, right? Then there is a good teacher. A good teacher is one who knows his stuff, knows how to explain stuff, he knows how to have classroom discipline, whatever, different things that teachers need to do. That's what a good teacher means, right? Now, let's say this teacher breaks his leg one day. Did he become a worse teacher by that?
I mean, technically, because they can't teach.
Technically, yes, because, unless he gets a wheelchair and then he schleps him into the class, but in some technical sense, in a physical sense, you need to have working feet to be a teacher, because some teachers like to walk around when they teach, and it becomes harder when they can't, and so on. Or you need to be able to get to the classroom, things like that. But that's not a problem of this teaching. He didn't become a worse teacher. It'd be weird to say the guy became a worse teacher. He became a worse living animal, or a worse walker, yeah, but teacher and walker are two different, each have their own criteria of goodness. And he didn't become a worse teacher. When we talk about him becoming a worse teacher, we talk about the specific things which makes him as a teacher different from different people than people that just walk and run. If he would be an athlete, then breaking his feet might. It's also not entirely precise, but would be closer to making him a worse athlete because he broke his foot.
By this criteria can we find, meaning I feel like, to me what I'm trying to understand is how we can get consistency between the divisions that we're making between species of animals and the lack of division that we're making between humans, let's say. Right.
Oh, we could make divisions of humans if we want.
But we could also make divisions amongst animals. Do we have a best animal?
What do you mean the best animal?
Which animal does the animal things the best?
There could be things like that. I'm not sure where it would be.
Maybe we say that a lion is better than a zebra at being an animal. Meaning if in that sense of division, right? Meaning we're saying that human beings there are different kinds of human beings, and we're trying to find.
I didn't say there's different kinds of human beings.
Not different kinds of human beings. Different kinds of human lives.
That's what the racists say.
Isn't it all about like?
I know. I'm saying we're saying there's different kinds of human lives, and there's one human life which is superior,
which is
right?
which is more human, which is more unique,
which is more
it's
connected to what it is,
better
right?
at being a human, right? For example,
right. It's more essential.
My example I always give is that if what you could be better and worse. Let's try to see. What I usually think is that if you can be mistaken about this, right? This is the important thing, right? You can be mistaken about this. For example, if someone has a dog and he doesn't know what a dog is, well, dogs usually know what a dog is, but humans might not know, and he uses that dog for, well, I don't know, I'm looking for something very wrong, like he uses it to make an item, like to stuff his wall, there's this halacha, and you could use an animal for a mechitza, whatever, use it for a sukkah. That is not being a good dog, being a wall for a sukkah. I'm pretty sure. It might accidentally work, unless it runs away.
Yeah.
But that's obviously not a good, and if you're gonna judge your dog on how good of a wall he is, that's really weird, because it's quite the opposite. A good dog doesn't like to stand there and be a wall, he wants to run around. And that's a good dog. But you can be mistaken. And if there would be a sect of dogs whose thing is to stand there and be walls, then it would be weird to say, well, they're just a different species. They're not a different species. They're a part of the species confused about what they are.
Could you say the difference in animals and humans is that humans could create complex, the fact that they could create, but also not just create because animals could create, but create complex creations, whether that's ideas, complex things.
I guess that makes what makes people most human.
That's the one thing that separates animals from human. That at the end of the day, a beaver could make a really good dam, but they can't make anything more than that. Versus a human could create something that could create dams and create other things.
That might just be a product of something, though.
Right? No. So what I want to say is I want to get somewhere, but what I want to say, what I'm trying to say is that this is a true fact, obviously. Animals do things, they even do arts in some sense, or crafts. Some of them, the more interesting ones, like spiders and beavers and things like that.
It's limited to just that.
But they do mostly one, and humans do many. And this is the problem. Because this means that, unless you'll have some very regimented world where like somehow everyone if people would be born weavers and tailors and firemen and carpenters and software engineers and things like that, just by their birth, then it might make sense to say, okay, well, then they wouldn't be really talking about humanity. You would be talking about each human or each class of humans or sect or caste or something. And then you would say, well, each caste has its own good. There's something, but since humans have a choice between lives, right, this is what makes the problem bigger. Since we do have a choice between lives, at least the question assumes that we do. If we don't, then really the question is not really relevant. This is why this kind of moral discussion or ethical discussion must be. It bumps into limitations when it does this, but it tends to be very universalist or humanist in the sense that it's about what is good for humans. It's not about what is good for Jews. It's not about what is good for fathers. It's not about what is good for carpenters and things like that, because those are just seen as types of humans or things that humans do. And because they're just things that humans do, this is precisely why it seems like it wouldn't be the thing that is good for humans. None of these things. Or possibly none of them. Or maybe only one of them. But it's hard to see how, like, the things that humans do is that they don't have a specific thing that they do. Because that's like, the problem with that is that it's not a good, not a value. A value, we're at least the assumption in these discussions is that you're looking for a criteria, right? Something that has no criteria, it basically doesn't exist. Or in other words, doesn't have a measure that tells it what is good. Or we could go back to say like Protagoras, or everyone decides what is good for them. But that's another way of saying that there isn't such a thing as something that is good. That is an option. That radical option, relativist option is a real option that would solve the problem. But if you're looking for a criteria of good, then using that as a criteria wouldn't probably work, because it's like the opposite of a criteria. It's like saying, I'll explain you why. Because for example, when we think about matter, right? The way we think about matter is that matter is precisely a bad thing. Why is matter a bad thing? You see, I'm saying that matter is bad. And why is matter called bad? Like, or in other words, that evil means matter. Why would someone say such a weird thing? What they mean to say is something like this: that good things are things that know what they are, or that we know what they are, or that somehow a cup doesn't know, but has in it built in somehow what it is. And when it's good, it's good, and when it's broken, and so on. Now, the worst kind of thing would be something that doesn't even know what it is. Now, there are such things that don't even know what it is. There are absolutely such things in the world, but in some certain sense, everything we call matter, not in the scientific sense of matter, and there's still a sense of matter. Matter is just a word for something that can be something else. Right? For the being able to be something else, that's what we call matter. Right? That's why it's not something we see, unlike matter in material science. Matter in concept of matter, which is just being the stuff that everything is made out of. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the changeability of the stuff that things are made out of. The fact that they're not themselves, which means that they don't have stability. Stability is given by something else, by something other than the matter itself.
Like the fact that a table is not a table, but a table is a bunch of wood.
The table as a table could be a good table, if it's a good table, or a bad table, and even if it's a bad table, it's at least judged by the good one. Either the good example of the table, we get into discussions, who is the judge? According to Plato, it's the abstract form of the table. According to Aristotle, it's the example of the good table. But everyone, in order to be a table, there needs to be something to judge it.
Yeah.
That we measure, we measure relative to that. But the fact that the table is made out of wood, right? The being made out of woodness of the table, which is the matter of the table, actually has no judge for what it's good, because this wood can be burnt and become into ash. It can be cut up and made into a chair. It can be made into a casket for whatever.
There is good and bad wood, meaning at its form level, right? Meaning wood is made out of something also, right? And it can
wood has a form. That's why I said this matter is an abstract concept.
Meaning matter relative to its higher form is bad.
The word matter means,
organized by
the word matter
higher,
in Aristotle never means things that something is made of. It means the being made out ofness of something. Or if you talk about that something, the fact that something is never really that thing, because it could always be something else. The wood in this table is not really a table. It's still, like in certain sense, and this is like a metaphorical way of thinking about it.
Aimless wood.
The wood is always evil. Why is it evil? Because it's like a child that you try to put him into a classroom and he's never really there. He's always trying to run away. The matter is always trying to run away from what it is, from what we made out of it. Because, well, it's not really trying, but it has something in its nature where it's never entirely accepts, so to speak, the fact that it's a table. How do I know that it never accepts the fact? Because there's nothing stopping someone from just taking us and cutting it up, and then it's no more table. So it's not actually a table. The wood in the table is not a table. It's somewhat. It's part of the table now.
Is on a table level.
It's part of the table now. But
the wood doesn't do anything. The wood could participate in the unification of the table.
It participates in it, but not fully, because it always has optionality, right? It always has its option to go tomorrow and be something else. Well, maybe not by itself. Someone has to do it.
Like you turn this into a door.
Yeah, we turn it to act like probably an infinite amount of things. Mm-hmm. Maybe not infinite in every way, because wood has its own. That would be the form, anyways. But almost an infinite amount of things. It always keeps its options open. It's like someone who's like, this is why the Rambam said that matter is like a married woman who is never really loyal to her husband. She's always thinking of someone else. She's not even thinking. She's always has her options. Like it says in the Gemara that a married woman, when she meets a good-looking guy, she's like, you never know. Just keep my number. There's a story of Avigail and David, right? That's very. Avigail was married to this noble guy, and she met David, and she said, "We'll meet," and they did. But anyways, that's the metaphor of matter, and these people, they always talk about matter in this way. Is that matter is a woman who needs to be subjugated to her husband, but it's not really possible to be fully. In any case, why am I saying this? I'm saying just so we should understand why. But people often say this nowadays, that the value of a human being is his openness. That doesn't really make sense. Because openness it's what makes the problem. It's not the solution. This being able to be everything is just another way of saying has no criteria, has no value, has no measure of telling him what it is. Now it's true that this is a fact that it could be many things. This is this is something in dispute. But we can't make that the non-criteria. Making the non-criteria into a criteria would be a very weird thing to do.
Can it be like an entry criteria? Because then you're saying someone who is only one thing, that's bad. To be too specific.
It depends what you mean by only one. It depends what you mean by only one thing. There's a big debate about this in ethical literature and also in I think life advice kind of people. There's a big debate about being a generalist versus being a specialist, yeah. And Plato, for example, is very much on the side of specialization. The Republic claims that the virtuous city is virtuous because nobody does anyone else's job ever. It sounds like somewhat of an exaggeration, but it's really just a metaphor for the parts of the soul. So who knows? But anyways, what I mean is what you're saying is something like. Yeah, so what I would say is I don't think, to me it sounds weird to say that the best world is one in which nobody steps out of their line. I'm a teacher and therefore I never something said
we also
there are some people that have this thing, since you're a girl person, you're never allowed to change your tire because it's not your job. So okay, I don't know what's wrong. Maybe you should be a good human being and do that also. But I would say something different. I would say that
you have to do things that are more. That exist in prior souls, meaning you have to.
Right.
You have
so
to
what I
care
would
for
say
your
is
children.
that this discussion doesn't mean practically doing only one thing. Because practically doing only one thing would first be impossible. Like someone would say, I'm just a philosopher if I don't eat. I mean, you would stop being a philosopher pretty quickly, right? Or you'd be a dead philosopher, which is probably not what we're looking for. Right. So that's not a possible direction, or even.
Or if you look at functions that are just above animals, so animals play, eat, drink, go to the bathroom, sleep, but then when it comes to more human functions, only doing one.
Right, but even that would be weird. Why? Let's say humans have human crafts and human arts and human relationships or human kinds of relationships, human imaginations, which are in some sense different than what animals have, although they maybe also have imaginations. Are human, Aristotle for sure thinks that animals have imaginations. Human, math, although maybe animals, maybe machines can do math and so on. But I don't know if we would say, so we're not looking, the important thing is that I don't think we're looking for one thing to do. The problem is not that we can't do more than one thing. In order to be a human being, and maybe specifically to be a human being, you need to do more than one thing. Maybe a human being needs to do the most things. Well, we could talk about one thing, but an individual human, maybe the city, maybe the community can do things, so they share things with the division of labor, which helps very much. But in general, humanity can't be just about one thing. And
there's also something that humans uniquely do together, right?
Not only because of needing all the things for other things to work, but also because some of these are human things. I think that the question of the many lives is the question that there's going to be living goals, right? Like a person should only be doing one thing in the sense of having only one goal. That sense is, at least that would be the aim, that we don't really have. I'm going to explain that there's a problem. But I generally say there's a sane person is a person that does only one thing. The more things that you do, not in the sense of doing activities, in the sense of having, like I said, the kind of life that you want, or the kind of what we call the goal, right, or end, or vision, or sort of a dream, or the destination of your life can only be one destination. Like you could say, I am doing all these things in order to be a good warrior. That is a full life, just to be clear, right? A warrior, which is one of the options given in the ancient Greeks for sure, thought that was a full life. Not clear if people nowadays think so, or at least they're in denial of it. But a warrior has to do a bunch of things, right? And you might even need to know a bunch of arts and sciences. If you're a pilot, then you need to know a bunch of stuff about aviation and about who knows how many stuff. But you're not trying to be an aviation expert. You're trying to be a pilot. You're trying to be a warrior whose goal is whatever the goal of a warrior is. According to the ancients, it's to get glory for yourself. And that's a whole life. That's one thing. If someone is like, well, I'm a warrior on Mondays, and on Tuesdays I'm a dad, and I'm maybe a warrior has to be a dad too, I'm not saying, but and on Wednesdays I'm a
Carpenter.
that, and in the sense of like I'm organizing my life towards that, that would be a pretty confused person. Just seems apparent. Sometimes you have to do that, but you would be confused. In general, people would want. This is just as a like a coach level thing, right? People would want to say like, really, I'm this now. I'm just temporarily stuck doing this because I need to get back to my real life or something like that. And more than that, theoretically, like when we think about what a good human is, we can't really answer a good human as a warrior or a father or any of these things, because these things contradict each other. They're not the same thing. They're actions. They're all things that humans can organize their lives around, and some do. Right? Some people are. I'm a money maker. Like my name is whatever, and my job is to make the most money. Of course, I do many things in order to do that, and it doesn't really matter what. But I'm a money maker. That's something that people do. Although it don't really make sense, because money is like Aristotle says this, right? Money is something that is. It's very hard to see how it could even be a goal, because money just means the ability to buy stuff. Like the nature of money is not something that is
matter.
That is an end. It's
very material.
In that sense, yeah, it's an ability. It's a means, right? Almost by definition.
It turns out money wants to become different things every time.
Yeah, and it doesn't work. You can't like put it into somewhere that has to do things. In any case, but people actually do organize their life around that, or around honor, or around pleasure, or around freedom, all kinds of things which people see as what people now call terminal values, right? This is where everything ends. The fact that it's hard to find the one of those for a human is the big problem, right? The problem is not really the fact that we do many things is pretty easy to somewhat. I mean, some people don't even have coherence in that. Some people are like, I have to do so many things and I'm so confused. But let's say someone actually figures out what kind of person he is, which is hard nowadays because whatever, because the world doesn't make sense. But let's say you figure that out, there's a real problem. I don't know. Let's say even if you figure that out, or while figuring that out, you're going to be stuck with the problem of like, seem to be many options. Now, which one is the correct one? And maybe there's different ones that are correct for different people, but that doesn't entirely answer the problem, because then we sort of separate humanity into different species, which each have their own value, or which is racist. No, which is not scientific in the sense of not answering the question that we ask. People can do that. There seem to be many people that really think that way, right? That deny the question of there being a human God. Like they only want to know what a yid has to be, as if that's a different kind of thing, which is weird. Anyways, let's get back to us. Sure. So this is why there's a problem now. So like I said, there's the Rambam is living within a world where there's some sort of a solution to this problem. Where did I want to get from this? There's sort of a solution for this problem, and the solution works by finding this uniquely human thing. And the way his solution works, and this is things that say in Aristotle already, but the way his solution works is by saying that there is one thing that humans do. And this is one way of getting to it. There's other ways of deriving the same idea. There's one thing that humans do, which is not only more than what animals do, it's different. And not specifically animals, also, well, maybe gods or do the same, and that's the sense in which human is divine. But nothing else does that we know about does, or nothing else on this sublunar world does, and that is to know, to contemplate. I'm not going to say to think, because what we call thinking animals do us. In the sense of calculate and figure out where they are, where they want to go, and make plans. All those things are stuff that animals do, and this is not something that we discovered last week. It's very known. It's very important to realize this, that the place where Aristotle makes the distinction between man and beast is a very, very specific and unique place, even within humans. In other words, like Rambam and others in his circle draw this extremely elitist conclusion that most humans are not humans. In actuality, they're potential humans, but not really humans, because the thing that they think makes a human human is extremely rare. It's a capability that, in some sense, all humans have, and that's like a qualitative difference, right? We call it a different soul. It's a different kind of being. It's a different kind of thing than what animals do. But most people don't actually do it, most of the time. And that is knowing.
Then how do we? There seems to be some loop here, right? Which is if we're trying to figure out what is human based on what humans do.
No, we're trying to base out what humans are based on what humans are, which the best humans would be the ones who completely do that. Just like when we try to find out what a good dog is, we don't actually make a census of all the dogs and see what they do. Because some dogs are sick, some dogs are just some messed up breed which shouldn't even exist. Some dogs have bad owners that teach them bad. There's all kind of ways in which dogs are wrong, and it's not even logically incoherent to have most dogs be going wrong. In nature, it might not entirely be that way, but it's possible that most dogs are being bad dogs. The criteria is always to find the one ideal dog who is a full dog, is the best dog, and to judge everything else by him. And he does the same procedure for humans. So it's not a problem. The fact that 90% of humans don't actually actualize their humanity doesn't make this less of a criteria for what really a human is or should be. Like I'm saying, there's a problem here, but I'm just giving the logic of how it's supposed to work. It's because like Aristotle says always, we don't count the exceptions. And most people can be an exception. When doing this logic, we don't care about exceptions, we don't care about imperfect specimens. Like modern day people get like very stuck, and people much earlier would say like, well, how could you even say that the ideal dog has 4 legs? I mean, some dogs have 3 legs, but they're born with it, or they have an injury or something. And who are you to like impose your normative idea of a dog on the 3-legged dog? And Aristotle thinks that this is a crazy argument. Like, it doesn't even answer it. It's just like, be real, that's a bad dog. It's a sick one. And the fact that he exists, yeah, of course he exists, but it should be judged according to the perfect one. That's just his way of thinking. Like, ignore
Problem
the
cases.
edge cases. Yeah, he doesn't think that it's a good procedure in thinking to always be worried about those things. But the important thing, well, it's also, I actually wonder to what extent do all humans even have the ability to do this. But anyways, he thinks that they do, but I'm saying this because of people getting very confused about this nowadays, that they think that machines can think, but none of those machines I think inherently can do the things that Aristotle thought that makes humans by thinking or by knowing. Probably not. It's possible. I don't think it's impossible even according to these principles, but it's not the point. So, what am I saying? So that's the procedure. Okay, so the best human being is basically divine, and there's a reason we call this divine also because it's shared with divinities or with God or gods or angels or whatever you want to call them, who are said to be perfectly happy and therefore must be happy with thought all the time. And that's another derivation, and therefore the perfect human that's where we get back to our idea that the perfect human is a prophet, which is another word of saying someone who has divine knowledge of the divine, which is divine knowledge, the same thing, and really lives as a god. The best way to live as a human is to live as a god. This is sort of impossible, but almost possible, or possible for a moment, or so on. Now, as we noticed in our way here,
is it about achieving that divine knowledge or continuously having it?
Continuously having it.
Okay.
You need to achieve it also, but it's the activity of knowing, not the knowledge is not something that you put into a box. Not information, and not something that you can have, not memory. Memory of knowledge is only memory of knowledge, and it's called imagination in Rambam, and it's not knowledge. Knowledge is when you're actively knowing. God always knows all the things. Well, God doesn't exist in time, so he doesn't have the whole problem that we have of forgetting, but we're trying to be that, like that. It's not knowledge is not the kind. This is how you have to understand how they see knowledge in general. But knowledge is not the kind of thing that you put into a box or something like that. It's not an accumulation of facts. It's a kind of, in modern terms, we would say a kind of relation between the knower and the known. which is an activity. It's not a state. It's a activity.
So you can go in and out of that state?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
In the way modern people think, it's something closer. In other words, works more like what people think of as meditative states and things like that than the way people generally tend to think of intellect. But it's not meditative states because it has content. But it works more in that way.
So I was saying that because Bilam's donkey, for a moment, achieved
Not a
divine knowledge.
Yeah, of course, everyone was very upset about that, and
But then
thinks that ever happened, or whatever, was just a dream because it can't be. This is like his prime example of something that can't have happened. Donkeys don't achieve knowledge.
Okay. Because then that donkey would be greater than, would achieve humanity, essentially.
Yeah, and that seems to be, miracles can happen, but it's like
Not
a donkey wouldn't be a donkey, it would stop being a donkey.
Yeah.
The Ram doesn't believe that story. He believes the story, but he thinks that it's a vision, and precisely because this is like his extreme example of the crazy things that people believe, that donkeys can be prophets. No. Or people that act like donkeys. It doesn't work. Yeah. It can't be. What did I say? Okay, so now what am I getting at? So this is what divine human perfection is. And everything that falls short of that, ultimately, it's a shame that you were born a man. Right? You might as well have not been born human. Because your whole potential for being a human, which is actualizing your knowledge, was wasted.
Right, there's other ways in which you were not, right? Your political potential, maybe, right?
Okay, so wait. This is what it says explicitly. The Rambam says it explicitly, and this it says at the end of this chapter. Even if you have political perfection, you're not like that. But we'll get to this, 1 second. That's what ends up if you take this logic to its end. Then this is the logic that says in Aristotle's Ethics in book 10, I think, in later books 10 or 9 or 11, one of those. This is what he says. That turns out that the only real good for a man is what he calls contemplative life, which is the life of the gods, and based on theories, logics like this, and therefore anything lower than that is not really human, not completely human. And this is what's important to notice, is that this is not referring to what most humans ever do. Because you basically need to be a philosopher to even start to think. And being a philosopher means something takes 20 years of schooling in the academy or something. It's not like anyone that starts having questions is a philosopher according to this. Or maybe in some very minor sense, but you need to actually end up with answers. So because it's not, this very demanding idea. Now this is a problem in itself, and it's an acknowledged problem. Right? Even though it's not a logical problem, it's possible that the only good humans are the 1 in 10 generations. We went through this when we read that part, but it's at least a problem. It's at least weird to have most of humanity not really being humans ever. And besides for that, there isn't a very good way of finding this in the Rambam's language. But besides for that, the way to find it was this is the way you're saying it. Besides for that, it's not even clear that, I could say it like this, it's not even clear that this is a human perfection. Because remember, interesting thing, that we were looking for something that is the specifically human condition, the specifically human kind of things that he's good at and should be good at. Now suddenly it turned out that we said that the best human is not a human but a god. Because, and I'm skipping over things here, but you're almost literally a god if you can actually think all the time. Then according to what Aristotle and the Rambam sometimes say is that the fact that we don't become gods, it's much easier to say in a polytheistic world where you could become a god, but anyways, the fact that we don't become God, or in monotheist language you would say the fact that we don't become subsumed into God, is just that we live in time and it's impossible for us to always think. Now, realize that this is something very weird, because now we're saying something like the only time when you're fully human is when you're knowing, and what makes you human is the fact that you can't do that all the time, because otherwise you'd be a god. Or the Rambam would say an angel, okay? Forget
what makes you human is transcending your humanity.
Yeah. And then we go back and say, no, what makes you human is the fact that you can't transcend it, because in other words, we have to differentiate humans from the top and from the bottom, right? Humans are not beasts because they can think. And they're not gods because they can't always think. So which one is it?
So why can't it be that? It could be that.
So a human, the perfection. So okay. So now we end up saying something. If you want to make this question into an answer, like say, well, very nice. The human is this link between these two levels, and then you end up saying that the perfect human is not someone who always thinks, because then you would stop being human entirely. You would become entirely a god. Perfect human is in other words, it's enough. I could say it like this: in order to be a perfect human, it's enough to have thought once, or I don't know what's the sheer.
Yeah.
Because we're anyways not trying to get you to think always, because then at some point you just stop being a human. So we're trying to have you to think sometimes, and then we could even broaden this and say that the perfection of humanity.
The perfect human is the one who thinks between meals. Like that's a little weird.
That's what turns out, because it's not possible to think while you're having a meal.
Right.
At least not in this sense, according to. I read a quote from
should be ideally
from
hooked up to IV
Stoic
drip,
Epictetus yesterday. He said like he wants to see the philosopher laying in bed and being a philosopher like check up on him. He said when you're having sex, you forget, you don't even remember his name. He's not a philosopher. That's what he said. Like, come on. I'm not sure what he wanted to say with that, but that's a quote from an ancient guy. Point is, like, it's not so yeah. It turns out that we are aiming for that in some sense, but not really, because we can't achieve it. So we're aiming for someone that once thought, or maybe you might as well just say we're aiming for humanity where some people think, because that's
some of the time.
Some people think some of the time, because that also seems to be part of humans, to not have everyone being able to be philosophers, right? For very similar reasons to the fact that I can't be a philosopher all the time, because I live in time and I have a body and I need to serve the body's needs and so on. I can, be the biggest ascetic and I still won't be God, right? Platonis is this great ascetic person, or at least sometimes, and said like, well, he thinks he was one with God 3 times in his life or something. So, and that seems to be a lot. So, so the same limitation seems to apply to humanity as a group, since we need, we need people to work in the mines and all kind of stuff like that, and those people won't be philosophers. Seems to not be reasonable. And we need children, and we need stupid people for whichever reason, but nature makes really dumb people and really invalids and stuff like that. Okay, then at some point we start saying, oh, we don't care, they're just exceptions, but it's not really an exception that most humans are not philosophers. I mean, that's weird. It's the philosophers that are the exception. So you might as well start saying that the perfection of humanity is there to be one philosopher. This is sort of the logic that the Rambam says in the Sakadama. Some philosophers said in other ways. About what this means is, now making this back practical, what this means is that there's like a tension between these two goals. Not a tension, but there's in some sense.
I'm just curious, just to harp on that for half a second. Meaning, let's say you have flowers, right? And the ideal flower, right, or the perfect form of flower has all its petals symmetrical, right? You're not going to get many flowers like that, right? You're going to get, most flowers are going to be some defection of that main thing. Flowers could be better and worse.
That's correct.
So
that's what I said. I don't think it's a logical problem for most things to fall short of perfection. That's true. Most flowers, and it's also true that not only that, I would tell you that all the flowers are trying to be that. Right? Because that's what makes, when we try to understand a flower, and in a certain sense understanding what it's trying to be, what it tends to be, we're going to go up to the most perfect one where everything doesn't have any blemishes or any imperfections. And we're going to say everything is understood, right? Because understanding means, part of understanding at least.
Right, the fact that the perfect attribute exists doesn't mean that you have to find it.
Right, but all this flagma are trying to be that one.
Right.
They're just failing. True. True. And should they feel bad for it? Maybe that's really...
That's how the distribution lands.
Okay, so very good. So the distribution works like this. That's true. Nature always works with these kinds of distributions, right? But the question is, going back, this is I think the real place where we get what the question is, practically.
And even a perfect flower where all its petals are perfectly aligned will likely not be that way forever.
Right, it will die.
The sun has to come out and be at a certain angle, has to be at a certain stage of growth.
Yeah, for sure. And not only that, all flowers die, at least all the ones we discovered meanwhile, and therefore he's not going to be perfect forever. because he's mortal. Maybe the species sort of will carry on, and in a certain sense, the perfect flower is a theoretical construct. But Aristotle doesn't want it to be entirely theoretical, because that would be Plato. So he says the perfect flower is the one that was ever perfect, and all the other ones are just around it. But I think that the place where this, I agree with you, there's not a theoretical problem.
It's not just around it, also it's tending towards it. That's somewhere along the spectrum.
Exactly. They are understood by reference to it. We understand them by reference to it. Just the very fact that we say this is not perfect is referring to the perfect one, right?
That's not a logical problem, and I don't think there's a ton of dissonance in that idea either.
Humans don't like when you tell them that they're the imperfect ones for some reason. That's one of the problems, I think. I wonder about this sometimes, like I discussed this when we did that class, right? Humans have this thing that they want to be the biggest thing in the universe. Okay. And some of them agree to have a God above them, but nothing besides for God can be above them. And some people even want to be above God, which is another word for the most perfect thing, or whatever. And it's weird sometimes, like why? What if I tell you that you're the 37th most important thing? I don't know. But anyways, no, back to this discussion that we're having. But there's a reason probably for why. But anyways, back to the discussion that we're having. Since we started with an extremely practical question, right? Remember that we had an extremely practical question. Practical question is, what kind of life should I live? Which really means towards what should I organize my life? But it also really means the practical question of what kind of life should I live? Because organization is not just a theoretical thing, right? It's going to cause me to do a bunch of major and minor decisions which lead towards that. And now, since if the answer would be simple, right? Again, if we wouldn't have the problem, right? If there would be only one thing, and we would literally accept this answer fully and say the only thing you should be good at is thinking, then everyone should be aiming for the contemplative life. So that's a specific kind of life. You go to a monastery and you sit there and think, or something like that. But the reality is that because of the reasons we discussed, that is not actually the best life for most people. Maybe their best life is going to somehow be judged by that, but they're not going to practically be able to go and even attempt to direct their life towards that. That makes sense. Most people, since don't have the ability, or don't have at this stage the ability, or for practical reasons don't have the ability to live the contemplative life, it turns out that we need to talk about other lives in a very serious way, as if there can be a goal. Maybe it's not really philosophically possible, but as if they can be a full life, a full good life in itself. Because this is the difference between humans and flowers, that we don't have to really tell that one flower, you're going to try to be perfect, but you're never going to be it, and it should be happy anyways. But humans, since they have this thing called a mind, some sense of a mind, then it's not going to work. And to tell a person who is not living a contemplative life in a practical sense, you can tell them, well, it asks you how to live my life. You say, well, you should really be thinking all your life. I'm not even thinking for 5 seconds a year. But that's what you should do, and according to that you should judge your actions. This is not going to be useful.
You need a lower principle of...
We need to acknowledge the existence of other lives. Practically. Even if not theoretically. If you come to my class, I'll tell you not. But theoretically, practically...
Acknowledge lives that don't exist within the conditions that allow full human flourishing, right?
They exist in a broad sense, but not in a practical sense. In other words, I need to... secondly, there's two reasons here, really. There's two reasons I could say this. One reason is that the contemplative life isn't actually available to everyone at every stage.
Right, I'm saying it doesn't have
That's the stage theory. No, stages, I mean, that in order to be able to think, you need to first...
go through adolescence and
so on. And maybe you need to first have your moral life in some kind of order, because otherwise you're not going to be able to be disciplined and not going to think straight and all kind of things like that. Right? So you need to actually have a whole bunch of practical things in order before that. Besides for that, that's the hierarchical, right? vertical problem, there's also an horizontal kind of problem, right? Where some people, due to their station in life, or due to their innate abilities, or due to their choices, maybe, are not going to be cut out for that. They're never going to get there. They're not working on the city. Because of the needs of the city, exactly. Cannot be there. Well, there's a big problem. Who makes the lottery to put those people there? But why can't we tell everyone?
Why can't you call it? No, why can't you call it like a pre-human state?
You could call it whatever you want. The problem
it still acknowledges it. If your definition of humanity is this level, and if they're not making it, then they're not meeting that criteria.
Yeah, you could say that, but it's not. Well, number one, by both, like I explained a second ago, by both of them, because it might, yes, be part of the criteria. But practically, we need to make it into a subject. Another way of saying this would be, we need to talk about the other things as a subject in themselves. There's a subject called...
We talk about the conditions for the contemplative life as...
Either as conditions, or as the people who are stuck in those conditions. But just to be clear, those people also need to be good. Right? So we talk about the good, right? We didn't start talking about the only good thing you should do. We talk about what is the people should be good, right? Everyone wants people to be good. Everyone. Laws are just about people being good, or at least not being bad, which is a minor version of not being good. Education is about people being good. Basically, all human endeavors, right? As opposed to technological endeavors which are not human. But all human endeavors are about making people good. Now, if I tell you the only human good really is thinking, that is not going to be true. And both, because even the thinking person, until he thinks, is going to need to be good in a different sense of just thinking. Although you could say it's only good because it leads to thinking. That's theoretically true. And you could call that the only human, and before that's pre-human or whatever you want to call it. But practically, I'm going to have to talk about a kind of learning. I'm going to have to give a whole course of ethics or practical laws and practical education and things like that, which don't have the thinking as their good, at least not in an explicit sense. And the same thing, we need all the other people to be good, because just the reason we need people is because humans have a society. And then this is why sometimes, right, and we could even say, like Aristotle sometimes says, we could even say that what makes humans interesting is that they're political. Meaning that they have to live in society, and according to him, no animals live in society. And that means that, and this is how the Rambam explains it, by the way. I'm not sure where it comes from, this explanation. That the reason humans live in society and animals don't live in society is precisely because humans are different ones from each other. So animals, of course, have groups. That was not, nobody's in denial of that. But those groups, for the most part, are all doing the same thing. There's some division of labor within animal groups, but not so different. They don't need laws. Why don't any animals have laws? This is like a question that Rambam asks. Why don't animals, there's no laws for the animal kingdom? Like no lawgivers who go around making laws and giving fines to the bears that ate too many fish or something. Why don't they have laws?
You don't need any structural principle.
Because all bears are more or less the same. It's true that if one will eat all of them, the other one will die. I don't know. Maybe that's really what he says. Because they're all basically the same. And therefore, they might need some leadership. They might need to have some social organization. But they're not going to need any explicit laws. Because bears, just being bears and working with the organization, are going to survive. But humans are not going to survive that way. Why? Because some humans are bears, and some humans are giraffes, and some humans are cockroaches, or whatever. And in other words, they're as different from each other as that. That's what I mean to say. They have as different goals, as different views on life, as different
interests,
as different midas, attributes of their body, of their mind and character, and therefore there is no way to get them to coordinate without some explicit things like, we don't steal, no matter if you're a person that loves that, or a person that hates that, or a person that thinks that really everything belongs to them, whatever it is. That's not a thing we do in this, like explicit law, don't steal. Animals don't have explicit laws, don't steal, because they don't have like some animals that's stealers and some animals that are tzaddikim. There isn't this kind of difference between animals. Now, in any case, it turns out that this is also something unique about humans. And you could even try to say that what makes humans good is that they live in a city, that live with other people in an explicit way. And so you get back to something that is like rational. But in an explicit way, in a way with certain laws or with certain understandings. And they can coordinate with each other. Now, the Rambam and these arguments and earlier sources don't accept this as what really means to be a human. Because you can ask the question, okay, and then? And like humans are for making cities, who are for human flourishing, and then what does the flourishing consist in? So end up with that not being complete. But that is a need. And it's even a need for the other thing, which is what he calls
a goal, even though it's not a terminal goal.
Yes, and it's a goal it's necessary for the terminal goal, because not only does the individual person need to have his house in order before he thinks, he needs to live in an organized city, because it's very hard to think, just like it's hard to think when you're hungry and when you're messed up emotionally and so on. It's also hard to think when your neighbor is trying to steal all your food all the time. You're going to have to not be a thinker, you're going to have to just be a warrior or whatever. So you need all of these things, and therefore it turns out that there is two human goods, and we talk about it this way, although, like I said, the way he thinks, and there's people that argue otherwise, both in all the sources and in all these discussions, there's like professors and interpreters that think that it's not really true, that maybe the only human good is really a political good, maybe it's really backwards. But the way that the Rambam says explicitly many times, and the more traditional way is to say that there are...
That's philosophers to rule, right?
Yeah, but okay. The traditional way to understand it is the ultimate way of being a human is only to know. But there is a need to talk about a good life, which is not a life of knowledge. Now the word is life of practical virtue, life of having good midas of Yiddish. That's a whole different life, though it's not really a goal. If someone only is going to do that, he's going to really, ultimately, according to by the judgment of the perfect human, which is rare and divine, will be a waste of not worthy of being born. But by the lights of himself, will be very good tzaddik and a nice guy and a successful human.
So why does that matter, though?
It matters because that other guy needs him to be that. And because if everyone else wouldn't like Rambam's languages, and that's what, just to be clear, this is what the answer to your question about the intellect, the actualized, the perfected intellect being the form to the good of all the other parts of the soul.
It's just interesting because we see a lot of language where we describe on an ontological level the city being greater than the individual, right?
Yeah, but in different sense. Because let me just finish it. City is a good individual in the sense, well, just because anything that's good for one person is twice as good for two people. If the whole city would be really good.
But it's not spoken about in that way where it's just a multiple. It's spoken about as a society being that's what I mean by saying ontologically. That this thing that exists called a society, just like planets are greater than people, so are societies greater than the human constituents, right?
Yeah, because of this. But I don't
because they can provide the circumstances for an individual.
That's the Rambam's understanding.
But then you're not admitting to that ontological order to begin with. You're not saying that societies are greater than individuals. You're saying that societies are greater than...
They're greater because they make better
individuals
than individuals. There aren't really individuals that don't live in society. If there would be such an individual, he wouldn't be a human individual, it would be a divine individual entirely. And that's like outside our discussion. Or it would be worse than society and also be outside. A society is only on the human level, and on the human level, the society is better because it makes better humans. It's not better. This is for sure the way he understands it. The society is not the end goal. The society is the means towards. A society doesn't exist for the sake of the society existing. It exists for the sake of the individuals inside of it existing. But going to make them exist in a better way.
There is no form of the community that's greater than the matter of its constituents?
Yeah, this for sure works with Aristotle's Aristotelian way of thinking always, where the individual is always primary, ontologically.
For Plato, it doesn't.
Yeah, maybe not. But I don't know if there is really a form of the city which you are trying to achieve or something.
And then what criteria would we judge cities?
No, well, by the criteria of that's fine, but we wouldn't you have to explain me what that means or what that is really.
Okay. That's so difficult.
But again, it would be from the perspective of God, not from the perspective of humans. Because the human perspective, is going to have to explain itself.
No, but we don't need to. In that's not a loop you need to exit. Meaning, it's only if you admit that the perfect individual is the goal of the good society that you have to.
For us, it's the goal.
Head.
For us, again, the answer is like, okay, let's leave Plato and people alone. Plato might say things like the good individual doesn't really belong to society and things like that. According to our Mahalach, according to Rambam's Mahalach, which is much more still in this way, the good individual does ideally belong to a society. Plato might really believe that, or sometimes say that the perfect individual is actually outside of society, and he only his body lives in this society. But sometimes says things like that, or the Neoplatonists say things like that sometimes. But then this comes from whatever. In any case, here we're saying that the society is for individuals, and specifically for the perfect ones. But what I wanted to get at is just that forget about the society. Shmona is not a book that talks about society, which is another riddle, but it doesn't. But even if we talk about a specific person, we can't only talk about the intellectual virtues, because that just won't work. You won't even get to that. And since we're talking about virtues, that's just another way of saying we're talking about an excellence or in a good. And we need to talk about a lower sense of human life, of good human life, which is the practical sense of being a good human life, or we could say a political sense, because all of these lower virtues are social virtues. They're not really, for the most part, almost all of them are social virtues, and they're just about living with other people. But there has to be a whole, we have to at least, we have to at least even pretend constantly. Aristotle explicitly does this. He sometimes says, I'll give you 5 books just about the political best person. And then, there's another good person. We'll talk about him later. And the Rambam also does things like that, and anyone that is going to talk to real people is going to have to do that. Because otherwise you end up with skipping very important things, even for an individual that is able to be perfect in the second sense. You have to be skipping the whole discussion of a good person. And now this is basically that's what I was saying. This is what you were asking me about what he says when he says that the soul or the form of the person has all these levels. The most important level for our purposes is the what he calls the or the appetitive part. The wanting part, you could call it. We can get into that at some point, figure out what exactly these words mean. And that is mostly what makes a person in the basic sense. Someone that has wants and needs and dreams and plans and things like that. And that is going to have to be good. And the same thing with the intellectual characteristics, like the intellectual capacity, right? You have to be able to know how to think and so on. And that is all the form of the person as that, what he is. But the real form of the person, form is another way for a specific difference, right? Sort of what we were talking about before, with the difference, what makes something unique is its form, right? Same thing. And therefore, he says, the real form, the form of the human, is really the perfected human, which is not how he is born, right? Nobody is born a human. All people are only born potential humans. But the form of the human is the mind and actuality, or wisdom and actuality, which would be a form to all of this. Why is it a form to all of this? Just like every sort of higher form is
a form to the politically perfected human.
Exactly, because it would be using all of that as a matter. Just like in some sense, humans as political actors use the animal parts of them or the vegetable parts of them as matter to that, right? Forms and matter are relative terms. Right? Just like the wood is a matter to the table, although wood itself has a form and matter. In the same way, the entire political human is matter to the intellectual human. That's what he's saying. The entire political human but he's talking about an individual. It can be said for a city also, but he said that in different places. Right? You can say that the whole society is matter for the one smart person. Well, not smart person is a very bad word. The one who has acquired perfect intellect. But an individual also. The virtue, right? The excellence of all your parts are going to only be matter relative to not only relative, there will be matter to the what it really means to be you. And therefore, from that perspective, we say that until that like there's Gamble Das Nefesh Letoiv is the pusik that he puts on this. Without acquiring knowledge, all of this was for naught. Because remember that what makes a person is only what is specifically and uniquely a person. Everything before that is very nice and is needed for this, but it's not this.
Very inspiring.
But it's very inspiring, it's very demanding. That's why I said that really, practically, we need to start before that and talk about the practically good life. Firstly, it's good in itself, in the sense it's good for this life for sure. It's good for living in the world, makes your life better. Even though the philosophers think it's a waste of time, it still makes your life better. And also, it's the only way you're going to ever become a philosopher. So we need to have that. And we talk about this in our Neoplatonism class now, about the ladder of virtues, where civic virtue is needed. That's only a first step, but it's needed. And okay, there's other things over there.
I can't follow that one. The one with Antonio?
I don't know why nobody's